Alright, so your life sucks, and the only thing that you hate more than your wife is yourself. You've been gradually approaching the conclusion that to be alive is to be the victim of false advertising, and you're about 3 business days away from blasting yourself off of this godforsaken rock once and for all. You continue on like this for a few years, fueled by the residue of the hope that you lost. But then you see Hawk Tour become a millionaire from a crypto scam just 3 days after Luigi's favourite corporate parasite denied your mum the medical coverage she needed to survive her bone cancer. So you think, fuck it, I'm gonna do it. You're dead now, and as you're walking up the stairway to heaven, you stub your toe on the fucking steps.
Who built this uneven shit anyway? Wasn't Jesus supposed to be a carpenter?
You limp towards the pearly gates, and right there, standing at the gates, is God. I knew it would be Keanu Reeves. You're early. Fuck you. What was that for? Are you seriously asking me that? I'm sincerely asking you it. Look at the life you gave me! You gave some people fame and money for nothing, and after I struggle to be a good person my whole life, you take my mum away from me. And why is that bad? Because my life was already full of suffering, and you thought the cherry on top would be to give my mum bone cancer. I should do more than just slap you, you righteous twat. Full of suffering? What do you mean? Your life contained the least suffering of anyone on Earth. I think a thank you might be in order. The least suffering? You see everything, right? Look how often I cried. Look at all the tragedies. Surely you can see that I was hurting more than most. Yes, those bad things happened, but the badness of them was lessened. Your suffering settings were reduced by 80%. When you stub your toe, you feel the same sensation as everyone else, but the pain aspect of that sensation was always 80% less intense. Same goes for all forms of suffering pro rata. You're lying. You saw my whole life, right? So you can tell that my reaction to stubbing my toe was always just as intense as everyone else's? Yeah, because you're a pussy. Your suffering was 5 times less intense across the board, and yet you modelled your judgments about that pain socially. You heard people talking about how much it sucks to stub your toe, and so you decided that's what it must mean for something to really suck. And just as you assumed that orange must look the same to you as everyone else, you assumed that pain must be the same for you as everyone else as well. Well, alright, but that's just physical pain though. What about taking my mum away from me? That's a whole different kind of pain. Yes, the suffering comes from a different source, but that was still just a bad experience. And I reduced specifically the badness of all your bad experiences by 80%. Wait, so you're saying that when anyone else lost a loved one, their suffering was quintuple the intensity of mine? Essentially, yes. How the hell could they possibly endure that? I couldn't even endure my version, that's why I'm talking to you right now. You could have. Could have what? You could have endured it. You were just as strong as everyone else who experienced quintuple the depth of suffering. But you never bothered to use that strength. Well, if I had the strength, then why couldn't I use it? Again, you could have, you just didn't. You seem confused, so let me explain what happened. When you were a toddler, you realized that crying was a powerful tool to get what you want. But you realized that if you cried too much about too little, then the opposite happened. And so you became a master of finding that edge. You realized it was counterproductive to cry just because your parents refused to buy you an ice cream, but if you fell over and scratched your knee, and then cried about that, then your parents would buy you a double scoop. So, over the years, you developed a sophisticated sense of what is hard to deal with and what isn't. You deciphered the social consensus on what constitutes an overreaction and always stopped just before you crossed the line. And it wasn't out of a desire to manipulate people, you fully believed yourself. And since you never experienced anyone else's pain, you could never have known how easy you had it. For example, you heard that breakups are hard, and so when you found out firsthand, you sat in bed eating ice cream and cancelled your gym membership, just like you saw in the movies, because you genuinely thought the level of pain you underwent justified that reaction. When you lost your job, you spent a week day drinking, when in reality you were more than capable of brushing it off. At your mother's funeral you were a drunk mess, but you had it in you to be everyone else's rock and guide the rest of her family through the pain. Every set in the gym, every run, every work session, you finished them all before you were done. I put your life on training wheels and you rode off a cliff because you assumed they were ankle weights. Your life still wasn't a walk in the park, but in the final analysis it was the easiest life ever lived. I gave you more rope than anyone in history, and you hung yourself with it. Sorry, excuse me one moment. Our protagonist then proceeded to cry for 2 whole days. He couldn't stop thinking about how strong his mum must have been subjected to bone cancer with a smile. He thought about how inspiringly strong everyone was, about how well they held it together despite bearing the weight of a reality that was 5 times heavier than his. He ruminated on what he could have achieved with his life had he known about his advantage and how much more he had in him. He was overcome with a sense of love and reverence for all of the people still down on Earth. He felt shame, guilt, regret. He remembered all the times he lost his temper at his wife, all the times he complained, all the resentment he indulged in, all the hard conversations he never had, all the times he felt sorry for himself and wallowed in self-pity off the back of his mum's condition. He felt the urge to apologize for his hostile attitude, and replaying their earlier conversation in his head, he came to a realization that broke him. He realized that he, the man who had lived the easiest life in history, had understood his mum's condition, fundamentally, as something that happened to him. This realization stopped his crying in its tracks, and then God asked him whether or not he would like a redo, to go back down to Earth and start over. And our protagonist, the man who only recently unalived himself, jumped at the offer, despite knowing that the pain of life wasn't going to be any easier the second time around. And so he was reborn, with nothing but the emotional residue of his encounter with God and the knowledge that his suffering would always be reduced by 80%. In that second life, he went on to be a great man, and even better, a good one. He rarely forgave those who slighted him, because most of the time he simply forgot that they had. He was a musician, a scholar, an entrepreneur, an athlete and an artist. He was all of these things not through talent, but through perseverance. After all, it was 5 times easier for him to persevere. He never took more than he needed, and he always gave so much back to everyone else. He married the same woman, but this time he loved her. In return, she gave him a family, and he raised them well. Then, in his 70s, he contracted bone cancer himself, and dealt with it in an even more exemplary manner than his mother, making the whole ordeal so much easier on his family. He was placed in a particularly somber intensive care unit. Most of the patients there were elderly and didn't have any visitors, so they spent most of their time in a solemn silence out of a fear of disturbing each other. And as their silence grew, so did their fear of death. He was only there a week before the whole unit had lightened up, and after 2 weeks, the patients were like a teenage friend group, giving each other offensive nicknames like Saggy Sam and Miserable Mark, making fun of each other and collectively laughing at the absurdity of their situation. They made so many jokes about death that they forgot they were supposed to be afraid, and some of them even began to show improvements in their conditions. He made videos from his deathbed, joking around about his condition with his friends and showcasing his resolve to encourage other terminally ill patients to greet death with a gentle laughter. Within weeks, these videos had made their way around thousands of hospitals, and they even got translated into different languages. And for a few months, there was a lightness in ICUs and palliative care units all across the globe. Some other patients in other hospitals began making their own videos, and for the first time in years, laughter was now a daily occurrence in the children's ward. The viral phenomena kick-started a new cultural custom of camaraderie and conversation amongst the terminally ill that forever changed and lightened the air of hospitals. The attitude of millions towards death became lighter, and naturally their attitudes towards life followed suit. There was even a significant dip in the rate of people unaliving themselves that year. But eventually he passed away, and as soon as he did, he suddenly remembered everything about his previous life, about his conversation with God and the source of his belief about his lightened suffering and his reverence for others. He ascended the stairway to heaven, this time without stubbing his toe, and as usual, waiting at the top of the steps was God. "You're full. Well, you're the one who allowed me to experience life on easy mode." Yeah, about that. Well, maybe easy mode isn't the right term, but you reduced my suffering by 80%. I can't thank you enough for that." That was a lie. "Excuse me?" "You experienced life twice. Both times there was no reduction in suffering. The badness of bad things was just the same for you as it was for everyone else." "Why would you lie about that?" "Because, look what happened."
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.